He knocked me over. I landed on the dog bowl.
This one's wife. Harry. Deportation awaits. Hello, I'm H.G. Tudor. Hitherto, there has been speculation about whether Harry might find himself either booted out of the United States or not allowed back in if he goes elsewhere. This all revolves around his admission of drug use that took place in Spare, which was published back in January 2023. The issue at heart is, did he lie on his visa application claiming that he had never taken illegal drugs, even though there is this admission contained within Spare? Or was he truthful about his previous drug use, and therefore is that a situation that meant that he received special preferential treatment, which naturally many people will be thinking, why would he get that? Previously, matters seemed to recede a little with regard to this issue, notwithstanding the court case that had been brought by the Heritage Foundation, where a judge had ruled essentially to allow Harry's privacy to prevail. But given recent events with Donald Trump returning to the White House, and him engaging in what might be seen as doing many undoable things, it doesn't seem as far-fetched that Harry might find himself with problems. After all, Trump has sent the military to the Mexican border. He began deporting migrants to Guantanamo Bay. He started or threatened trade wars with China, Canada, Mexico, and the EU. He banned transgender women. Well, let's have it right. He banned men from female sports. He's frozen the $41 billion per year US aid program. He's proposed annexing Greenland and suggested turning the ruins of Gaza into a Riviera of the Middle East. Some out-of-the-box thinking from the Donald, and part of this, of course, is quite clever on his part. By coming out with what might be seen as rather outlandish suggestions, what he does is he allows the press to go running away with those whilst he can get on with the business of what he wants to do. He does demonstrate that nous, which many people don't necessarily credit him for. Anyway, this isn't about Donald Trump, but it does mean that his involvement has increased the possibility that the issue of Harry and his visa will be revisited. Ed Cumming, writing in The Telegraph, explains the idea that Harry might be in the United States unlawfully gathered pace this week when it was announced that a lawsuit trying to make his US visa record public will reopen in court next week. There has been some suggestion that recent activity by this one's wife is an attempt to deflect from what's going on with Harry. Believe me, that's not the case. This one's wife doesn't give a fig about Harry, save to the extent that it impacts upon her, and deflecting from his woes vis-a-vis visa application is not something that's high on her list of priorities. Furthermore, she doesn't think that far ahead. Given the multiplicity of schoolgirl errors that this woman has made, much of what she does is a knee-jerk instinctive response. The recent video that was posted to Instagram is a clear indication of that. It wasn't done to try and draw people's attention from what's going on with Harry and his court cases. It was done in order to bring attention to her, to make her look good, with the pursuit of the prime aims, and was precipitated by the recent favourable portrayal of Catherine, Princess of Wales, with the children, and quite possibly as a consequence of Trevor Engelson having his third child. Both of those events are likely to have come upon the radar of this one's wife, threatens her control, and, accordingly, her mid-range narcissism causes her to have to leap to do something which is either concoct a story about the 15-year-old and generate some merchandise, or utilise a true story about the 15-year-old in a completely amateurish and haphazard video which has drawn plenty of scorn. Either way, it was done for her purposes and nobody else's. Nevertheless, the court case involving the visa records reopens next week. And it marks the latest skirmish in a long-running campaign by the Heritage Foundation, a conservative think tank, to make the Duke of Sussex's visa details public. They launched, if you'll recall, a lawsuit in May last year against the Department of Homeland Security after it refused to release the Duke's private records following a Freedom of Information request. The Heritage Foundation believes that the Duke's admission to taking illegal drugs, including cocaine and psychedelics, in his 2023 memoir Spare, would normally have disqualified him from obtaining a US visa. They argue that there is immense public interest in making his documents public, as they will show either that he lied on his documentation or he was given preferential treatment, as I mentioned earlier, by Joe Biden's administration. The case appeared to have been settled in September 2024, when Judge Carl Nichols ruled that, like any foreign national, the Duke has a legitimate privacy interest in keeping his files secret. The judge was appointed by Trump during his first term, but has been described as unpredictable and has not always taken the Trumpian line. With Trump back in the White House, however, Nichols has reopened the case. At a hearing on 5th of February, he said he had seen secret records that are currently sealed from public view and that he wanted to see the maximum disclosure as long as it doesn't violate privacy in the Duke's case. The possible volte-face on the Duke's documentation reflects a sweeping change of mood in the United States. Trump's White House is pursuing a strict crackdown on immigration, while Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency is advocating for radical transparency in government. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex's brand of cuddly Democrat politics has rarely looked so out of place. Although the president doesn't have a unilateral power of deportation, which is usually handled by the United States Department of Homeland Security, the president can exert considerable influence. There is now the strong possibility of the release of some of the documentation relating to the case, says Niall Gardner, director of the Margaret Thatcher Centre for Freedom at the Heritage Foundation. Heritage has been close to the Trump campaign. They were behind Project 2025, a controversial instruction manual referred to as a blueprint for an assault on democracy by certain critics. Trump disavowed the document, but his government has adopted several of its recommendations, including dismantling diversity, equity and inclusion schemes, tightening security at the southern border, and imposing extreme fiscal discipline on the government. This hearing clearly reopens the legal case, so it's very encouraging, Gardner says. At the same time, we are urging the President and Trump administration to release Prince Harry's immigration records. We have a new US administration in place that is focused on the enforcement of immigration law, so we are urging full transparency. Anyone who applies to the United States has to be truthful on their application, and it is not clear that this is the case with Prince Harry. He has openly admitted to widespread and extensive drug use. What he put on his application should match exactly what he put in the book Spare. No one should receive preferential treatment. No one is above the law. Everyone should be treated in the same way, regardless of whether they are royalty. We believe Prince Harry is a major public figure and should be held to account. If Harry lied on his application and that was revealed, he would highly likely face deportation. The stakes are very high. Much depends on the type of visa the Duke is on, which remains unknown. In December 2024, Trump ended up siding with tech bosses in a row over the H-1B visa, which brings skilled workers from abroad. Prince Harry is unlikely to be on this visa, which requires a university degree, and as we all know, he's a bit of a dunce, so he hasn't got one of those. It's been speculated he is on an A1 head of state visa available to members of a reigning royal family, the kind of thing everyone does when they're trying to live a more normal life, which is subject to less stringent regulations. In April 2024, it was reported that the Duke had formally updated his country of residency to the United States. As the husband of the Duchess, who is an American citizen, Harry would in theory be in line for a green card. In February 2024, he told breakfast show Good Morning America that he had considered becoming a US citizen but parked the idea for now. One aspect of this is the argument that his admission was only made in a book, rather than, for instance, under oath. Nigella Lawson previously got into problems with regard to her admitted cocaine use in respect of a visa for the United States, but she had admitted the use of cocaine under oath in a court case. Harry has not done so, and I understand that certain legal experts state that a distinction can be made, that it would not necessarily be held as an admission. That does strike me as rather strange, because therefore it would suggest that he's lied about his drug use for the purposes of increasing sales in Spare, which would then lead the question to, well, if you did lie about that, and that's the line that you're taking, and you've never taken drugs, but you put it in Spare to increase sales, what else in Spare is a load of bullshit? There's plenty of stuff which might find itself seen as such. More likely, he has taken drugs, and foolishly, as a consequence of the encouragement of his wife, as we know, had a particular steering hand with Spare, he admitted to this and now has been caught in an invidious situation for him, but of his own doing. Whether Trump can be bothered to do anything about it is one thing. After all, he's got bigger fish to fry, as I've explained. The fact is, Trump is no fan of Harry or this one's wife, which could be problematic, but he is a fan of the royal family and was a great admirer of Queen Elizabeth II. He got a state visit to the UK in 2019, having previously been forced by protests to settle for tea in Windsor instead. And he issued a statement after Queen Elizabeth II's death in 2022. Melania and I will always cherish our time together with the Queen and never forget Her Majesty's generous friendship, great wisdom, and wonderful sense of humour. So, on the one hand, it would probably cause great delight to Trump to cause problems for Harry and this one's wife, but on the other side of matters, the fact is that he might not want to cause problems for the royal family. Last February, Trump said that if he won a second term, he would not support Prince Harry. But remember, Trump is a transactional narcissist, and what he said last February was last February, and it doesn't necessarily mean that he will follow through on it now. He did say that the Biden administration had been too gracious to the Duke. I wouldn't protect him, he told reporters at the time. He betrayed the Queen. That's unforgivable. In extremis, if the Department of Homeland Security and the State Department do not open Harry's records, the President has the power to demand them himself. He has form for opening access. One of Trump's many executive orders since he took office for a second time last month was to declassify files relating to the assassinations of JFK and Martin Luther King. However, possibly Trump's desire to maintain good relations with the rest of the royal family could help Harry's blushes. I think Trump is going to get caught between a personal disdain for this one's wife and Harry, but not wanting to embarrass the palace, with which he wants to have a strong and close relationship, says James D. Boyes, an honorary research fellow at UCL Centre on US Politics. Of all the foreign countries he clearly has great affection for the UK, he has golf courses here, family connections here. Presumably, they are lining up another big visit in the near future. Any moves with regard to this one's wife and Harry will be carefully coordinated between the White House and the palace, and that might ultimately lead to Niall Gardner being disappointed. But at the moment, there is a clear and present problem for Harry. On the one hand, he's in the sights of the Heritage Foundation and a judge that is amenable to reopening the case, and even if that does not succeed, there is, although it might be seen as an outside possibility, that Trump himself opens up the matter, as he has done in relation to other things. This could mean, therefore, that if Harry has been found to lie, there would be considerable pressure to deport him or keep him out of the country. And it'll be interesting to see what he does in relation to his attendance at the Invictus Games. Whether will he go, running the risk that he might not be allowed back into the United States, or will he stay and see what happens next, with the potential for him to be deported? What can be said is that he faces a clear risk. He has admitted to taking drugs, which ordinarily would mean that if you'd mentioned that on your visa application, you wouldn't necessarily be allowed in. But furthermore, if it transpires that he states on his visa application or stated that he hasn't taken drugs when there's a clear admission that he has, then he's lied. And actually, it would appear that the telling of the lie is more damaging than the drug use in the first place. If he'd been open about it in the visa application, there's a possibility that steps might have been taken which would see a less onerous outcome for him. But the fact that he has lied is ordinarily grounds for deportation. And if that doesn't happen, then he would be seen to receive preferential treatment, which would go down very poorly indeed in a country which doesn't have royalty and indeed rejected royalty some nearly 250 years ago. Thus, there is a clear problem for Harry. But this is also naturally a problem for this one's wife, because not only is this yet more adverse publicity that they could do without, but if Harry finds himself deported, that poses a problem particularly for her. Leaving aside the fact of, oh goodness me, my husband can't live in the country that I'm from, it's more about the case that she grifts off his reputation. As we've made very clearly, and the fact that I call her this one's wife, the only reason that people know about this one's wife is because of Harry. And if he has to go and live somewhere else, then the likelihood is she would have to follow him. Or would she? I suppose it would depend on where he would go to. The most logical thing would be for him to return to the United Kingdom, which of course poses a massive problem for this one's wife, because her narcissism would immediately tell her, you can't go there. That country hates you. The press hates you. The royal family hates you. Now, whilst describing it as hate is putting it rather high, it's clear that plenty of people do dislike her, and members of the royal family are distinctly unimpressed with her behaviour. So if she were to return to the United Kingdom with Harry, it would make for a very rocky existence for her indeed. Furthermore, it would appear that any attempt at salvaging her reputation through connections is better placed within the United States than anywhere else. Thus, if she were forced to leave the United States because she needed to follow Harry because of his reputation that she milks, this would pose a significant problem for her in terms of, in effect, being caught between a rock and a hard place. I need Harry because it's his reputation that I have basically dined out on over the last 9 or so years. However, if I leave the United States, I don't really have much options with regard to trying to monetize things. What does she do? Well, that's not our problem. But what it might mean is that because Harry moves somewhere which becomes too difficult for her and reduces her opportunity to monetize various schemes, or at least keep the flame slightly flickering and alive as to the potential for future opportunities, that this becomes a ground for disengagement. We're some way off from that. First of all, there has to be an actual opening up of Harry's visa application. That may not yet happen, but the risk, as I've explained, has increased. If that does take place and it's found that he's lied, it doesn't necessarily mean that deportation will follow, but there would certainly be a huge storm if that were not to take place. And therefore, if it's opened up, and if he's found to have lied, and if he's deported, the most logical thing is that he would then go back to the United Kingdom. He would certainly be financially supported by his father, so he needn't worry about ruin in that regard. But for this one's wife to return to a country which she has simply stated that she's never going to go back to, presents her with a massive problem. Whilst she would have the financial support undoubtedly through King Charles, and she would still have the link to Harry, which she milks, the fact is she would find herself in an environment which is far more hostile to her and cut off from the few remaining opportunities that she has. And that could well precipitate the possibility of disengagement. What are your thoughts with regard to this scenario? Do you think that the whole deportation thing will just blow over and they'll find reasons not to release it so that Harry's done another favour? Or do you think it will be blown open? And if so, do you think he'll be found to have lied and deported? What do you think that will mean in relation to where it all ends up in respect of the relationship with this one's wife? Let me know your thoughts in the comments section. I'm HG Tudor. Thank you for listening.